I never thought the end of my marriage would happen in a lawyer's office, 3 weeks after my father's funeral, over a document I had never signed. My name is Claire Bennett. I am 42 years old, and I work as an art curator at a gallery in Chicago. I spend my days looking at paintings and trying to understand what people were feeling when they made them. I never thought that skill would help me understand what my husband was feeling when he forged my name on a divorce decree. It was a Tuesday morning in April. I was sitting in a leather chair in Thomas Wright's office. The room smelled like old paper and lemon polish. Thomas had been our family attorney for 23 years. He sat across from me behind a mahogany desk that probably cost more than my first car, talking about trusts, tax implications, and asset distribution. I had heard maybe half of it. My mind kept drifting to the funeral, to the rain, to the way my sister Rachel kept touching her hair like she was making sure it was still there. David, my husband, was supposed to meet me for lunch in an hour. He had texted me that morning asking how the meeting went. I had not answered yet because the meeting was not over. I wanted to tell him in person. I wanted to tell him the number, $10 million. Even now, saying it out loud sounds ridiculous. My father had spent 40 years building that business. I knew it was successful, but I never imagined the final number would be that large. Thomas was saying something about a valuation when Margaret Chen walked in. Margaret was the notary who had worked with Thomas for years. She was a small woman in her 60s, with reading glasses on a chain and the kind of face that did not smile easily. She was carrying a manila folder. She set it on the desk in front of Thomas. She did not look at me. She said, "Thomas, we have a problem." Thomas opened the folder. He read the first page. His face changed. Not a lot, just a tightening around his eyes. He looked up at me and said, "Claire, before we continue, there is something you need to know." I reached for my phone. I was going to call David. I wanted to hear his voice. I wanted to tell someone. Margaret said, "Before you make that call, I need to show you something." She slid a document across the desk. I looked at it. It was a divorce decree. My name was on it. David's name was on it. The date was March 15th, 2 months ago. I said, "What is this?" Margaret said, "According to the records, you have been divorced for 2 months." I just stared at her. I thought she had made a mistake. I kept waiting for someone to explain what was happening. I looked at the signature at the bottom of the page. It looked like my name, but it was not my handwriting. I had never signed this document. I had never agreed to a divorce. David had never mentioned divorce. I said, "This is impossible. I am married to David. I slept in the same bed as him last night." Margaret said, "I am sorry, Mrs. Bennett, but legally you are no longer married, and this affects the inheritance directly. Your father structured everything around the assumption that you and David were still together. If this divorce is valid, the entire distribution changes." I said, "I did not sign this. I did not get a divorce. This is fraud." Margaret said, "Then you need to prove it." I did not know it yet, but what I discovered over the next 3 days would force me to question everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my family, and the people I trusted most. Before I continue, tell me where you are listening from today. I met David Bennett at a gallery opening 7 years before we got married. I was 28, working as an assistant curator, and he was 31, just starting his own financial consulting firm. He wore a navy suit that fit too well and asked me what I thought about a painting I had been studying all evening. I told him it reminded me of the way light looks right before it rains. He said he had never thought about it that way. I thought he was charming. At the time, I had no reason to think otherwise. We dated for 2 years and got married in the spring. It was a small wedding, just family and close friends. My father walked me down the aisle and did not cry. David looked happy. I looked happy. We both believed we were making the right choice. David made me feel safe. That was the word I used most often when people asked about him. Safe. He was stable in a way I had never known growing up. He remembered birthdays. He asked about my day. He never raised his voice. He worked long hours and traveled frequently, but he always came home. I told myself that was enough. I told myself that not every marriage needed to be passionate to be real. But looking back, I see things I chose not to see. The way he kept his phone face down on the table, the way he took calls in the other room, the way he traveled to conferences that seemed to happen every other month. When I asked about them, he said they were client meetings. I believed him because I wanted to believe him. We did not have children. We talked about it in the first few years, but the timing was never right. Then the timing became less important. Then we stopped talking about it. I told myself it was fine. I told myself we had each other. My father did not like David. He never said it directly, but I could see it in the way he changed the subject when I talked about my husband. He would ask about work instead. He would ask about the gallery. He would ask about anything except David. Once, after dinner, he said, "That man has too many secrets." I asked him what he meant. He said, "Nothing, forget it." I told myself my father was difficult. I told myself he had always been protective. I told myself he would come around. He never did. 3 weeks before he died, I went to visit him in the hospital. He was weaker than I had ever seen him. He held my hand and said, "Claire, are you happy?" I told him I was. He looked at me for a long time and said, "That is all that matters." I thought he was being kind. I thought he was finally accepting David. I was wrong about that too. My father, Richard Bennett, died on a Thursday morning in late March. He was 71 years old. He had been sick for 8 months, but he did not tell anyone until he could not hide it anymore. I found out when my sister Rachel called me crying. She said the hospital had called her. She said he had a stroke. She said I needed to come. I drove from Chicago to Milwaukee that afternoon. It took 4 hours. I did not stop for gas. I did not stop for food. I just drove. When I got to the hospital, Rachel was sitting in the waiting room with her hands in her lap. She looked up at me and said, "He is awake, but he cannot talk." I walked into the room. My father was lying in the bed with tubes in his arms and a mask over his face. His eyes were open. He looked at me. I sat down beside him and took his hand. He did not squeeze back. He just looked at me for a long time. Then he closed his eyes. He died 3 days later. The funeral was on a Monday. It rained. Rachel wore a black dress and kept touching her hair. She cried during the service. I did not cry. I just stood there and watched people I did not know very well say things about a man I did not know very well either. After the funeral, Rachel and I sat in my father's house. The house was full of furniture we did not want and pictures we did not need. We drank coffee and talked about the arrangements, about the flowers, about which of his friends would need to be called. We did not talk about him. We did not talk about what it meant that he was gone. Rachel had always been the dependable one, the daughter who stayed close, the daughter who showed up, the daughter my father called every Sunday. I moved to Chicago after college. I called on holidays. I visited 3 or 4 times a year. Each visit was polite. Each visit was short. Each visit ended with him saying, "Take care of yourself," in a voice that sounded like he was saying goodbye. Sitting in that house after the funeral, I felt the distance between us. Not just the physical distance, the emotional distance. Rachel had been there. I had not. Rachel had shown up. I had visited. She looked at me across the kitchen table and said, "Thomas Wright called me this morning." I said, "The lawyer?" She nodded. "He said he needs to see you, about Dad's estate." I said, "When?" She said, "Tomorrow morning. He said it is important." I did not ask what it was about. I did not need to. I knew what happened next. The will would be read. The assets would be distributed. The practical business of death would begin. I said, "Okay, I will go." Rachel said, "Do you want me to come with you?" I said, "No, I will go alone." I did not know it yet, but that meeting would change everything. I left Thomas's office in a fog. I do not remember walking down the 3 flights of stairs to the lobby. I do not remember finding my car in the garage. I sat in the driver's seat with the engine off for almost 20 minutes, staring at the leather folder on the passenger seat. The copies of the documents Margaret had given me felt heavy. I opened them again. The signature still looked like mine. The date still said March 15th. I still could not breathe. I drove home on autopilot. The traffic lights blurred. The radio played something I did not register. When I pulled into the garage, I sat there until the automatic door closed behind me. The house was quiet. David was still at work. I walked into the living room and sat on the couch. On the wall above the fireplace, 3 framed photos hung in a row. Our wedding, a weekend in Vermont, Christmas 2 years ago. In all of them, David was smiling. In all of them, I believed I was safe. I pulled out my phone. I stared at his name on the screen. I needed to hear his voice. I needed him to tell me this was a mistake. I pressed call. It rang once, twice, 3 times. "Hey," he said. His voice was normal. "How did the meeting go?" I said, "We need to talk. When are you coming home?" He said, "Around 6. Is everything okay? You sound strange." I said, "Just come home." I hung up before he could ask anything else. I did not cry. I did not scream. I just sat on the couch and tried to map out how a person could share a bed, a bank account, and 15 years of life with someone and still know absolutely nothing about them. I thought about the divorce papers, March 15th, 2 months ago. I tried to remember where I was on March 15th. I had been at the gallery. I had a meeting with a collector about a new exhibition. I had come home tired. David had made pasta. We had watched a documentary about architecture. Nothing unusual, nothing that would make me think my husband was filing legal documents to end our marriage. I thought about the signature. It looked like mine. The loops were right. The slant was right. Whoever had done it had studied me. Maybe they had gone through my mail. Maybe they had watched me sign things at the gallery. Maybe David had kept old cards I had written him and traced the letters. I thought about Rachel. She was the witness. My sister had signed her name on a document that said I was getting divorced. My sister, who called me every Sunday. My sister, who had held my hand at the funeral. My sister, who had sat across from me at the kitchen table yesterday and talked about flowers and arrangements without saying a word about this. David came home at 6:20. He dropped his keys in the bowl by the door, loosened his tie, and asked if I wanted takeout or if he should make dinner. He moved through the kitchen like he always did, like nothing had changed, like the ground had not cracked open beneath me 3 hours earlier. I watched him from the hallway. I said, "I went to Thomas today." He paused, holding a glass of water. "How did it go? He finally gave you the numbers?" I said, "He gave me something else." I walked to the kitchen table and laid the divorce decree down. I watched his face. He glanced at it. Then he looked away. Then he looked back. His expression did not crack. It just tightened, like a mask slipping into place. He said, "Well, Claire, what is this?" I said, "Tell me." He set the glass down. "It looks like a divorce decree. Did Thomas give you this?" "I do not understand." I said, "It says we have been divorced for 2 months. It has my signature. It has your signature. It says Rachel was the witness. Tell me what it is, David." He rubbed his face with both hands. He let out a breath that sounded almost tired. "I was going to tell you. I just did not know how. Your father was dying, Claire. You were stressed. I thought if I handled it quietly, you could grieve without worrying about paperwork. We talked about it. You were overwhelmed. You just forgot." I said, "I did not talk about it. I did not sign it. I did not agree to it." He shook his head slowly. "You were not yourself. After the diagnosis, after the hospital visits, you were exhausted. I handled the filing so you could rest. Rachel helped because you could not focus. It was just a formality. I kept it quiet because I knew you would panic." I stood up. I said, "I am calling a handwriting expert tomorrow, and I am calling Rachel." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something behind his eyes that was not concern. It was calculation. He said, "Claire, if you drag this out, it is going to be messy. The inheritance is tied to this. If the divorce stands, the money goes to a foundation. If we fight it, it goes public. People will talk. Your father's name will be in the papers. Do you really want that?" I said, "I want the truth." He did not argue. He just nodded once and walked upstairs. I heard the shower turn on. I stood in the kitchen and looked at the papers. His story was smooth, too smooth. A grieving wife who forgot she filed for divorce? It was possible. But it did not match the date. March 15th. My father's stroke was March 22nd. David had filed this before my father was even in the hospital, before I was exhausted, before any of it made sense. I did not sleep that night. David was asleep beside me, breathing evenly, like a man with nothing to hide. I lay on my side and stared at the wall. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the date. March 15th. My father's stroke was March 22nd. David had filed for divorce before my father was even sick, before I was exhausted, before any of his story made sense. At 3 a.m, I got out of bed and went to the home office. I opened my laptop and logged into our joint bank account. I pulled up the credit card statements for March. I scrolled through the transactions. March 10th. Dinner at a restaurant downtown. March 12th. Gas station near the office. March 14th. Hardware store. March 15th. Nothing. No restaurant. No client lunch. No conference registration. Just a coffee shop at 8 a.m. and a grocery store at 6 p.m. I checked his calendar app on his phone. He kept it open. Never password protected because he said we were married. We had nothing to hide. March 15th showed a single entry. Client meeting, 10 a.m. No client name, no location, no follow-up notes. Just a blank meeting with a man who did not exist. I went back further. I looked at the last 6 months of his travel. He had taken 7 client trips. I checked the dates against our credit card statements. 4 of them showed no hotel charges, no rental car, no meals, just the flight booked through the company account. I called the airline's customer service line at 4 a.m. I gave them his confirmation number. The agent told me the flights were refundable and had never been used. David had never taken those trips. He had been somewhere else, doing something else. And I had never asked. I sat in the dark office and felt something cold settle in my chest. Not surprise, not anger, something worse. Recognition. I had spent 15 years building a life with a man I did not know. I had told myself he was stable. I had told myself he was reliable. I had told myself that not asking questions was the same as trust. But trust is not the absence of questions. Trust is asking the questions and believing the answers. And I had never asked. I thought about the way he kept his phone face down, the way he took calls in the other room, the way he traveled to conferences that never happened. I had seen all of it. I had just chosen not to see it. At 6 a.m, I heard David get up. I heard the shower. I heard him moving around the kitchen. I stayed in the office. I did not want to look at him. I did not want to pretend. At 7, he knocked on the door. "Claire, are you okay? You were not in bed." I said I could not sleep. He opened the door. He looked at me. Then he looked at the laptop screen. The credit card statements were still open. His face changed. Not a lot, just a tightening around the eyes. He said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Looking." He said, "Claire, we talked about this last night. I handled it because you were overwhelmed. Do not make this into something it is not." I said, "You never took those trips, David. The flights were never used." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I canceled them. The clients rescheduled. It does not mean anything." I said, "Then where were you on March 15th? He said, "I told you. I was handling the divorce paperwork." I said, "No. You told me I was handling it. You told me I asked you to do it. Which is it?" He did not answer. He just stood there in the doorway. And I realized then that I was not going to get the truth from him. Not yet. Not unless I forced it out of him. I closed the laptop. I stood up. I walked past him without looking at him. I went to the bedroom and pulled out my suitcase. I started packing. He said, "Where are you going?" I said, "To see Rachel." I drove to Rachel's house in the suburbs. The neighborhood was full of young families and minivans. Her house was a pale blue colonial with a swing set in the front yard. When I walked in, she was in the kitchen with her 2 kids, rolling out cookie dough. Flour on the counter, music playing softly. Everything looked normal. She looked up and smiled. "Claire, what are you doing here? I thought you were going to Thomas's office today." I sent the kids upstairs with a bag of chocolate chips and turned to her. I pulled the documents out of my bag and set them on the kitchen table. I watched her face. She looked at the first page, then the second. Then she went pale. I said, "Did you know about this?" She stepped back from the table. Her hands started to shake. Then she started to cry. "Claire, I thought you knew." I said, "I did not know. I did not sign it. I did not agree to it. Did you see this before you signed it?" She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "David came to me 2 months ago. He said you two had discussed it. He said you were overwhelmed after Dad's diagnosis and just could not handle the paperwork. He said it was easier if he filed it quietly so you could focus on the funeral and the estate." I said, "I never discussed it with him. I never asked him to file anything." She swallowed hard. "I asked him. I asked him if you were really okay with it. He said yes. He said you were relieved, honestly, that you just did not want to deal with lawyers while Dad was sick. I thought I was protecting you." I looked at my sister. She was not lying. Not exactly, but she had chosen the easier path. She had seen the holes in his story. She had felt the wrongness of it. But David was reliable. David was the steady one. And questioning him would have meant admitting she might have helped him destroy my life. So she did not question him. She signed. I said, "He filed it on March 15th. Dad's stroke was March 22nd. He did this before Dad got sick, before I was tired, before any of it made sense." She covered her mouth. "Oh God," I said, "you did not think that was strange? You did not think I would have told you?" She shook her head. "He said you would be angry if I got involved. He said it was better to let you process the grief without pressure. I chose to believe him because it was easier." I stood there in her kitchen and looked at my sister. She was not a villain. She was just human. She had ignored the red flags because it was easier to believe the man who always wore the right suit. I had done the exact same thing. I said, "I need the truth, Rachel. Not his version, yours. What did you notice?" She wiped her eyes again. "He kept talking about money. He kept saying Dad was going to leave everything to you and that you would give it to him to manage. He said if we were married, the taxes would be higher. He said divorce would protect the assets. It sounded like financial planning. I should have known better. I just did not want to believe my sister's husband was lying to me." I nodded. I did not feel angry at her. I felt tired. She had chosen the path of least resistance, and now she was standing in her kitchen, crying, while her kids played upstairs, realizing she had helped tear my life apart. I said, "I'm going to figure this out, and I am going to prove it. But I need to know if you are going to stand with me or with him." She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, "I am sorry, Claire. I am so sorry." I did not hug her. I did not tell her it was okay. I just picked up the documents and walked out the door. I drove home from Rachel's house with the windows down, even though it was cold. I needed the air. I needed to feel something other than the weight of what my sister had just told me. Rachel had chosen to believe David, not because she was stupid, not because she was cruel, but because it was easier. Because questioning him would have meant admitting that the man who wore the right suit and remembered birthdays was capable of destroying his wife's life for money. And Rachel did not want to believe that, so she did not. I pulled into the garage and sat in the car for a long time. I thought about the last 15 years. I thought about every time David had said client meeting, and I had not asked which client. I thought about every trip he had taken that I had not questioned. I thought about every late night at the office that I had accepted without verification. I had done the same thing Rachel had done. I had chosen the easier path. I had chosen to believe because questioning meant confronting something I did not want to see. I went inside. David was in the living room watching television. He looked up when I came in. His face was carefully neutral. "Where were you?" he asked. I said, "I went to see Rachel." He turned off the TV. "What did she say?" I said, "She told me you came to her 2 months ago. You told her we had discussed divorce. You told her I was overwhelmed and could not handle the paperwork. You told her it was easier if you filed it quietly." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, That is what happened. I said, "It is not what happened. I never discussed divorce with you. I never asked you to file anything." And Rachel knew that. She just chose to believe you because it was easier. He stood up. "Claire, you are being unreasonable. I was trying to help you." I said, "You were trying to steal from me. You filed for divorce before Dad got sick. You used a notary who retired 2 years ago. You forged my signature, and you manipulated my sister into being your witness." He shook his head. "You do not know what you are talking about." I said, "I know exactly what I am talking about. I checked the credit card statements. I checked your calendar. I checked the flights you supposedly took. None of it happened, David. You were somewhere else, and I am going to find out where." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw it. The calculation, the assessment. He was figuring out how much I knew, how much I could prove, how much damage I could do. He said, "If you drag this into court, it is going to be ugly. Your father's name will be in the papers. The inheritance will be frozen for years. Is that what you want?" I said, "I want the truth." He said, "The truth is we were having problems. The truth is you were not happy. The truth is I was trying to protect you from a messy divorce while you were grieving." I said, "The truth is you forged my signature, and I am going to prove it." I walked past him and went upstairs. I packed a bag. I was not staying in this house anymore. Not with him. Not while he looked at me like I was a problem to be solved. I drove to a hotel downtown. I checked in under my maiden name. I sat on the bed and pulled out my laptop. I started going through everything, every statement, every receipt, every email, every calendar entry. I was going to find out exactly what David had been doing for the last 6 months, and I was going to prove it. I called Thomas from the hotel room the next morning. I told him I needed a handwriting expert. I told him I needed access to the county recorder's office. I told him I needed to pull the original filing documents. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Claire, if you do this, there is no going back. Once we file a challenge, it becomes public record. David will know. His lawyers will know. This will not be quiet." I said, "I know." He said, "Are you sure this is what you want?" I said, "I am sure." I spent the next 3 days in that hotel room doing what I should have done 15 years ago. I looked. I did not just listen. I did not just believe. I pulled David's credit card statements for the last 6 months. I matched every transaction to his calendar entries. The client meetings that had no client names, the conferences that had no registration confirmations, the trips that had no hotel charges. March 15th, the date on the divorce decree. David's calendar said, "Client meeting, 10 a.m., but his credit card showed a charge at 10:23 a.m. at a gas station 20 miles from our house, a gas station near a strip mall that had a county recorder's office on the second floor. I called the recorder's office. I asked if they could confirm whether a divorce decree had been filed on March 15th at approximately 10:30 a.m. They said they could not give me that information without a court order, but they could tell me the name of the notary whose stamp was on the document. The notary was Margaret Chen's predecessor, a woman named Patricia Holloway. I called Margaret. I asked her about Patricia. She said Patricia had retired 2 years ago. Her commission had expired in December. She had not notarized anything since then. But the divorce decree had Patricia's stamp, dated March 15th. I called the County Bar Association. I asked if they had records of who had been working as a notary contractor at Patricia's former office in December. They did. A temporary contractor named James Miller. He had left the office in December to take a full-time job elsewhere. I found James Miller's LinkedIn profile. He was now working as a paralegal at a firm in Indianapolis. I sent him an email. I did not tell him what this was about. I just asked if he had ever notarized a divorce decree for a David Bennett in March. He responded 2 hours later. He said he had never notarized anything for anyone named David Bennett. He said he had left that office in December and had not worked there since. I had everything. David had used a retired notary's stamp. He had forged a witness signature. He had filed a divorce decree I never signed at a county recorder's office while telling me he was at a client meeting. I called Thomas. I told him everything. I sent him the scans. I sent him the credit card receipts. I sent him the email from James Miller. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "This is fraud. This is forgery. If we take this to court, it is going to be ugly. David will fight it. He will say you were mentally unstable. He will say you consented. He will drag your father's name through it." I said, "I know." He said, "You are ready for that?" I said, "I am ready." I hung up the phone. I sat on the hotel bed and looked at the stack of papers on the desk, the credit card statements, the notary records, the email from James Miller, the divorce decree with the forged signature. I had spent my life looking for hidden layers in paintings. I had spent 15 years looking at my husband and seeing only what I wanted to see. But now I was looking at the evidence, and the evidence was clear. David had not just lied to me. He had built an entire false reality. He had waited for my father to get sick. He had used my grief as cover. He had turned my sister into an accomplice without her even realizing it. And he had done it all because he thought I would not look closely enough. But I look closely. That is what I do. And David had just handed me the canvas. I met David at his office on a Friday afternoon. I did not call ahead. I walked past his assistant, opened the glass door to his private conference room, and closed it behind me. He looked up from his laptop. He did not smile. "Claire, what are you doing here?" I placed a manila folder on the table. "The handwriting report, the notary records, your travel receipts from March 15th, the contractor's resignation letter from December, everything." He opened it. He did not read it. He just stared at the stack. "I know you did this," I said. "I know you filed it before Dad got sick. I know you used a retired stamp. I know you told Rachel I consented. It is over." He finally looked at me. The calm was gone. The steady husband was gone. What was left was a man calculating his exit routes. "You are making a mistake. If you push this, the estate freezes. The trust gets locked in litigation for years. You will drain your father's legacy fighting me." Is that what he wanted? "What he wanted," I said, "was for me to be strong enough to handle the truth. What you did was steal from me. We were married, Claire. 15 years. I built a life with you. I paid for half this house. I covered your mother's medical bills when she was sick. You think a court will just hand it all to you? I will get my share. I will get alimony. I will get half the trust. And when it is done, you will have nothing left but a court order and a ruined name. You will not get a dime because you forged my signature on a legal document. You committed fraud. You used a dead notary's credentials. You lied to a county clerk. The judge will not care about your alimony when he sees you tried to steal $10 million from a grieving woman." He stood up. "You are being emotional. Think about this." "I have," I said. "I have thought about it every day for 15 years. I just did not know I was thinking about you." I turned and walked out. I did not look back. I knew he would call his lawyers. I knew he would panic. But I also knew he had run out of time. He had built a house of cards and forgotten I knew exactly how to make it fall. The hearing was 6 weeks later. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Fluorescent lights, wooden benches, a clock ticking on the wall. David sat at the defendant's table with his lawyer, a man in an expensive suit who kept checking his watch. He did not look at me. Rachel was not there. She had submitted a sworn statement admitting she signed as a witness without verifying my consent, citing David's assurances. The judge read it into the record. Thomas had hired a handwriting expert, Dr. Sarah Kim from Northwestern. She took the stand first. She placed the divorce decree on the screen and then placed samples of my actual signature next to it. She pointed out the differences, the pressure points, the stroke order, the way the loops were formed. She said with the calm certainty of someone who had done this 1,000 times that the signature on the divorce decree was not mine. It was a skilled forgery, but a forgery nonetheless. Then she presented the notary records. Patricia Holloway's commission had expired in December. The stamp on the divorce decree was dated March 15th, 3 months after Patricia had stopped notarizing documents, then the travel receipts. David's credit card showed him at a gas station 20 miles from our house at 10:23 a.m. on March 15th. His calendar said, "Client meeting, 10 a.m." The gas station was in the same strip mall as the county recorder's office. The judge looked at David's lawyer. "Do you dispute the forensic findings?" The lawyer shook his head. "We dispute the intent, Your Honor, but the documents are what they are." The judge did not waste time. The divorce decree is void. Mrs. Bennett remains legally married to Mr. Bennett until further proceedings, which I am ordering today on grounds of fraud, forgery, and undue influence. Given the severity of the deception, I am freezing Mr. Bennett's access to all joint and marital assets pending full audit. The inheritance proceeds to Mrs. Bennett as originally structured. David did not move. He just stared at the table. When the bailiff stepped forward to serve the asset freeze, David finally looked up. He did not look at me. He looked at the judge. "This is a misunderstanding. I was trying to protect her." The judge said, "You forged a signature. You used a retired notary. You filed a legal document without your wife's knowledge. That is not protection. That is theft." I stood up. I walked out of the courtroom. The air outside was cold. I did not feel victorious. I did not feel angry. I just felt the weight of 15 years lifting off my shoulders. I had spent my life looking for hidden layers in paintings. It turned out I just needed to look at my own life. 6 months later, I am not married anymore. This time, it is a real divorce. The papers came through in September. I signed them in Thomas's office, the same room where Margaret had shown me the forged decree. The irony was not lost on me, but I did not feel anything dramatic. I just felt done. David is under criminal investigation for fraud and forgery. The state attorney filed charges in July. He lost his consulting license before the trial even started. His firm collapsed. His partners distanced themselves. His clients left. He moved out of state before the charges were formalized. I do not know where he is. I do not need to know. Thomas told me he heard David was living in Arizona, working as a financial advisor under a different name. I did not ask for details. What happens to him now is not my concern. It never was. Rachel and I still do not talk much. She called once, about 2 months after the hearing. She was crying. She said she felt like she had broken something that could not be fixed. I told her she had. I told her I was not ready to pretend it had not happened. She asked if I would ever forgive her. I said I did not know. Forgiveness is not the same as forgetting, and it definitely is not the same as trusting again. But I still send money to her kids' college fund, $500 a month for each of them, not through Rachel, directly to the school. It is the only way I know how to be a sister without being a doormat. She knows the money comes from me. She has never thanked me. I have never asked her to. I kept the $10 million, not to buy a new life, but to finally live the one I had been putting off. I stepped back from the gallery. I did not quit dramatically. I just told my director I needed time to figure out what I wanted to do next. He understood. He said the door would always be open. I thanked him. I do not think I will go back. I started teaching art history at the community college, 3 days a week. The students are mostly in their late teens and early 20s. Some of them are there because they have to be. Some of them are there because they love art. I can tell the difference. I like watching them look at things carefully. I like asking them what they see and listening to them try to find the words. I read more. I walk in the mornings. I sit in quiet rooms and watch the light change through the windows. It is enough. It is more than enough. One afternoon, a student asked me why I changed careers. She said, "You were successful at the gallery. Why step away?" I said, "Because success is not about what you accumulate. It is about what you are willing to walk away from to keep yourself intact." She nodded. She did not fully understand. She will eventually. Last weekend, I cleaned out the spare closet. I had been putting it off for months. The closet was full of things I no longer needed. Old coats, boxes of files from cases I had closed, a broken lamp I kept meaning to fix, and in the back, pushed against the wall, a cardboard box I had not opened since the day I moved out of the house David and I had shared. I pulled the box into the middle of the room and sat down on the floor. I opened the flaps. Inside were photo albums. Our wedding album. A weekend in Vermont. Christmas 2 years ago. Pictures of us at gallery openings. Pictures of us at dinner parties. Pictures of us standing in front of paintings, smiling like we had all the time in the world. I did not burn them. I did not throw them away. I just looked at them for a long time. The love I thought I had was real. I had loved David. I had believed in him. I had built a life around him. That was not a lie. That was just a mistake. The man I thought I knew was not real. He was a performance, a carefully constructed version of a person designed to make me feel safe. And I had let him. I had chosen to believe the performance because it was easier than asking questions. I closed the album. I put it back in the box. I carried the box to the guest room and set it in the bottom drawer of the dresser. I did not lock it. I did not hide it. I just put it away. It is just paper now, just memories of a life that did not happen the way I thought it did. I walked to the kitchen. I made a cup of coffee. I sat by the window and watched the light change. The sun was setting. The sky was turning orange and purple. The trees in the yard were casting long shadows across the lawn. I thought about my father. I thought about the way he had looked at me in the hospital. I thought about the will he had left. He had trusted me with everything, and I had almost lost it because I was too afraid to look closely. I thought about Rachel. I thought about the way she had cried in her kitchen. I thought about the money I sent for her kids. I thought about the fact that I will probably never forgive her. And that is okay. Forgiveness is not required. Survival is. I thought about David. I thought about the fact that he is somewhere in Arizona, living under a different name, working as a financial advisor. I thought about the fact that he will probably do this again, to someone else, and there is nothing I can do about it. That is not my responsibility anymore. I took a sip of coffee. The light was changing, just like it always does. And for the first time in a long time, I was not waiting for it to rain. I was not bracing for the storm. I was just watching it happen. I am 42 years old. I teach art history 3 days a week. I have $10 million in a trust. I have a sister who does not talk to me. I have an ex-husband who is a fugitive. I have a life that is quiet and strange and entirely my own. And it is enough.